Greetings, 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 and bless each of you. Welcome to the New Life Interfaith Ministries Black History program, or really our offering. This is an offering that it's chock full of surprises and special guests. I'm Georgia Matthews II, and it's a privilege for me to be here. Blessings to you. And I remember a couple of things very quickly. When I was visiting Israel, upon that visit, spending about 9-10 days there, there were two museums, one in one place and one in another. And they were museums of the Holocaust, the incident where in history, Adolf Hitler, representing the Jews in his Nazi regime, had attempted to exterminate or to bring genocide to an entire demographic of people, that specifically being the Jews. And there was one museum outside of the museum atop the entryway, and it was like an $8 million project, if I remember correctly. And there were Hebrew writings on the outside, and I asked the guide, well, what do the words outside these entrance doors mean? And he said, in the Hebrew, it simply means, we will never forget. And there are some things, atrocities that have occurred in the area of black, bronze, and brown people during our stay, our extraction from Africa, and our stay here in these yet to be United States, that we can never forget. Not to foster or augment hostility, but to remind us of our contributions, and that's with the letter S, to American civilization and society, though coming through enslavement, slavery, whatever have you. Behind me, you'll see the 16th Street Baptist Church. That's the church, those of you that are not from this region who may be viewing with us, where the four little girls were bombed on a Sunday morning as they were attending Sunday school. I've had the opportunity to go through the museum that is located in the basement of the church, and I'm sitting now in what would be known as the historic Lynn Park. I've had the privilege of preaching in Lynn Park, 50-year celebration. TBN, Paul Crouch did his celebration, or at least the Crouch family, of celebrating 50 years of the civil rights movement a few years ago, and it was in Lynn Park, the same park where Bull Connor released water hoses, commanded the firemen to release water hoses on the children of the movement who were marching for their freedom. The dogs were released right here in Lynn Park, and that's what you're viewing. But I'm here to introduce a very fantastic speaker I believe will bless your life, who goes by the name of, and I'm telling you this, there's so many things I just want to say, Mr., and I emphasize the title, Mr. Anthony Ray Hinton. His book, The Sun Does Shine, was on Oprah Winfrey's 2018 bestsellers list, and had the opportunity of meeting him. I'll tell you about that at the close. But in his own words, he was a poor man in a criminal justice system that treats you better if you're rich and guilty than poor and innocent. I thought that was gripping and compelling. He made another statement that bitterness kills the soul. This man was incarcerated for 30 years, and exonerated from a crime, or at least proven that he was not guilty. So 30 years he served in a federal penitentiary for a crime he did not commit. No apology, no remuneration, loopholes in the law. So, and I'll tell you this, cleaning floors while at work in Bessemer, Alabama, proven, but 30 years of his life. And the investigating detective told him something when he was arrested at his mother's home that I'll probably never forget. He said, whether you are innocent or guilty, I don't care, but you're going to be convicted for 5 reasons. And he told them, 1, you're black. 2, because the victims were white. 3, the prosecutor is going to be white. 4, the judge is white. And 5, the jury is white. He was told that when he was arrested. And sure enough, he was convicted. And so it gives me a happy opportunity and privilege to introduce to you no other than Mr. Anthony Ray Hinton. 30 years on death row as a convict, and he'll tell you his own story. No apology, as I said, and no remuneration. After this interpretive dance, we will be graced with both the interpretive dance and there following the next speaking voice you will hear will be that of Mr. Anthony Ray Hinton. Blessings and peace.
I want Jesus to walk with me. 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 Be my friend, Lord. Be my friend. Be my friend, Lord. Be my friend. Out of all this pilgrim journey, I need you, Jesus, to be my friend. Don't leave me alone, Lord. Please don't leave me alone. Don't leave me alone, Lord. Don't leave me alone. Out of all our pilgrim journey,
My name is Anthony Ray Hinton. Today I'm going to share a story with you after spending 30 years on Alabama death row for a crime that I didn't commit. As I tell this story, I wish I could tell you that the state of Alabama made an honest mistake. But the state of Alabama didn't make an honest mistake. The state of Alabama knew that I was not the person who had committed the crime. I wish I could tell you that being born black and poor had nothing to do with me spending 30 years on Alabama death row. But the truth of the matter is, being born black and poor had everything to do with me spending 30 years in a 5x7. I never will forget the day that the police came to my mother's home. I was in the back cutting grass. One of the hottest days that I can recall in a long time. And as I was cutting the grass, I just happened to look up. And there stood two white gentlemen that I'd never seen before. I cut the lawnmower off and I said, "Can I help you?" One of the gentlemen replied, "We're looking for Anthony Ray Hinton." I said, "That would be me. How can I help you?" He said, "We have a warrant for your arrest." And I said, "What are the charges?" He said, we will explain that to you later. But right now, we want you to put your hands behind your back. I complied. I put my hands behind my back. They put the handcuff on me and proceeded to put me in the police car. And I said, at least allow me the opportunity to go in and tell my mother I'm being arrested for something. One of the officers said, we can't let you go back inside. And we argued for about 2 minutes. And finally, the other detective said, let him go in and tell his mother he'd been arrested. I goes in and I just show my mother the handcuff. And like any good mother, she began to scream and holler, what are those handcuffs doing on my baby? One of the detectives said, take him back outside while I stay in here and talk to his mother. I goes outside, they put me in the police car. A few minutes later, the other detective comes out and we proceeded to go to the Birmingham County Jail. And on our way there, the detective that wasn't driving, he asked me, did I own a firearm? And I said, no. I said, but my mother has an old Smith & Wesson that she keeps around the house for snakes. Once I revealed that my mother had a pistol, they dropped me off at a substation in Dora, Alabama, put me in the jail cell, and then they turned around and went back to my mother's home and told her that I had told them about a firearm that she had. My mother got the firearm, she gave it to them. They asked my mother, could they take it and check it? My mother told them yes, as long as they bring it back. They picked me up at the substation. We proceeded to go to the Birmingham County Jail once again. And as we was going to the county jail, I must have asked these detectives at least 50 times, why am I being arrested? They never would say anything. And as they drove just a little further, I asked the detective, maybe perhaps said a little louder than I had intended to. But I said, the detective, why am I being arrested? And this seemed to set the detective off that wasn't driving. He turned around, he looked at me. He said, you want to know why we arrested you? And I said, yes. He said, we're going to charge you with first-degree robbery, first-degree kidnapping, first-degree attempted murder. And I replied, oh, you got the wrong person. I haven't done any of that. That detective looked at me and he said, let me tell you something right now. I don't care whether you did it or didn't do it, but I want you to know this. I want you to know that I am going to be the one to make sure that you're found guilty of it. I said, for a crime I didn't commit. That detective said, you must have a hearing problem. Didn't I tell you that I don't care whether you did it or didn't do it? And as we drove just a little farther, the same detective turned around and he said, by the way, there's 5 things that are going to convict you. Would you like to know what they are? And I said, yes. He said, number 1, you're black. Number 2, a white man is going to say you shot him. Whether you shot him or not, believe me, I do not care. He said, number 3, you're going to have a white prosecutor. Number 4, you're going to have a white judge. And number 5, you're going to have an all-white jury. And do you know what that spelled? And he repeated the word conviction, 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 conviction. And as we got to the Birmingham County Jail, they put me in the holding cell. I had been in for about 2 hours, and finally this detective came, opened the door, and I said, detective, if you don't mind, will you tell me the date and the time this crime took place? He goes through his notes and he tells me the date and the time, and when he told me the date, I said, thank you, Jesus. But when he told me the time, I said, thank God. I said, thank God, because on that particular time and that particular day, I knew I was working. I told the detective my supervisor's name, and to be honest with you, I said, thank God, because my supervisor was white. And I figured once they go out there and talk to my white supervisor, they would find out that I was at work, and they would come back and just say, Mr. Hinton, we made a mistake, you're free to go. I gave them my supervisor's name, the address, the phone number. They left, and about 5 hours later, they returned. He opened the cell door and he said, I have good news and bad news. He said, the good news is we're no longer going to charge you with first-degree robbery, first-degree kidnap, first-degree attempted murder, for your alibi checks out. He said, but now we have decided that we're going to charge you with 2 counts of first-degree capital murder. I looked at the detective and I said, but I haven't killed anybody. I haven't robbed anybody. How can you charge me with capital murder? He said, do you remember me telling you on the way here, I didn't care whether you did it or didn't do it? He said, the same apply for these new charges. I don't care whether you did it or didn't do it. He said, but remember, I am going to make sure that you found guilty of it. And as I was trying to get this detective to understand that I could never take another human being's life, I was trying my best to convince him that I wasn't brought up to do something like that. He throwed up his hand as to say, be quiet. I stopped talking and that detective looked at me and he said, let me be honest with you. I truly believe that you didn't do it. But since y'all is always taking up for one another, why don't you take the rap for one of your homeboys who truly committed the crime? I looked at that detective and I said, detective, there's not a homeboy in this world that I would take a rap for like this. That detective shut that door, went on out. I sit in jail for about 1.5 years and finally I go before a judge. The judge read off the charge and asked me, do I understand what I'm being charged with? And I said, yes, Your Honor. He asked me, can I afford an attorney? And I said, no, Your Honor. That judge looked back in his courtroom. He called his lawyer up front, tells the lawyer that he wants him to represent me on 2 counts of first-degree capital murder. Without even asking me my name, that lawyer said these words, I did not go to law school to do pro bono work. I looked at that lawyer and I said, sir, would it make a difference to you if I told you that I didn't commit this crime? That lawyer looked at me for the first time and he said, the problem with that statement, all of y'all is always doing something, and the moment you get caught, you say you didn't do it. This is the lawyer that I had to somehow try and convince that I was innocent. This is the lawyer that I had to believe that was going to represent me to the best of his ability. 1.5 years later, I goes to trial, and that lawyer did exactly enough to get me convicted. I never will forget the day the jury came back, handed the judge a piece of paper. The judge stood up proudly, and he said, Anthony Ray Hinton, you have been found guilty by a jury of your peers, and it is the order of this court that I sentence you to death. And that judge had the audacity to say, may God have mercy on your soul. The prosecution perhaps said a little louder than he had intended to say, but he could be overheard saying, we didn't get the right nigger today, but at least we got a nigger off the street. And on December the 17th, 1986, I went to Holman Correction Facility. And once I got to Holman Correction Facility, they was in the process of executing 4 men. They had already executed 2 men, and that night they was going to execute the 3rd man. I didn't know what to expect. About 12 o'clock that night, they evidently placed the man in the electric chair, and men began to beat on death row. But the next morning, all you could smell was the burning of a human flesh. All day long, that smell would not leave my nostrils. And when a correction officer came by, I had wrote out a piece of paper, and that piece of paper read, Officer, is there anything you can give me so I won't have to smell this smell? That officer read that piece of paper and he looked at me and he said, no, there's nothing I can give you. But if there's a consolation, one day you will get used to this smell. And he went to walk away, but he backed back. He said, and by the way, one day, somebody will smell your flesh burning. And at that moment, I thought how cruel we are to one another. How cruel it had to be for another human being to look at and tell you that one day somebody will smell your flesh burning. He wasn't interested in was I innocent or anything. He just knew that one day somebody would smell my flesh burning. And as the day went by, I sit on that bunk bed that was too small for me. And I began to wonder, what had I done so bad that God had allowed me to be convicted and come to death row for a crime that he know and I know that I didn't commit? For 3 long years, I had closed my mouth and wouldn't say nothing to another human being. But going into the 4th year, approximately 1 o'clock in the morning, I woke up to the sound of a grown man crying. A man that I had lived by for 4 years and never asked him his name or where he was from. But all of my life, my mother had taught me compassion. My mother told me no matter what one does in life, he or she still deserves compassion. And that compassion made me get up. I walked to the bars and I said, sir, do you need me to call for the officer to come back here? It took this man a while to reply, but finally he replied and he said, no, I just got word that my mother passed. I told that man that I was sorry to hear that. And I told him if I can do anything for him, all he had to do was ask. I got off the bars and I sit on that bunk bed and I began to think. I closed my eyes as tight as I could close them. And I told my mind that I need to leave death row, and I need to leave death row where I could be at peace. And if ever I needed to leave now in order for me to survive this hell that I was in. I closed my eyes as tight as I could close them. And as a little boy, I always visualized being and meeting the Queen. That night, I closed my eyes and I imagined being at the palace. Once I got to the palace, I told the guard that I was there to see the Queen. They went in and told the Queen that I was there. They carried me inside and I introduced myself to the Queen. I told the Queen who I was and why I was there. We sit down and we talked about Prince Charles, Prince Harris, Prince William, and of course, the tragedy of Prince Di. And as we was talking about 35 to 40 minutes later, the Queen looked at me. She stood up and in her British accent, she said, Mr. Hinton, would you like some tea? And I told the Queen I would love some tea. And she asked me, what would you like in your tea? And I told her a spot of lemon. She had the butler to go out and bring some lemon in. I poured it in my tea and we conversate some more. About 25 minutes later, I stood up and I told the Queen I must be leaving. Now that I realize that I can leave death row anytime I want to, in my mind. I decided next that I would do something that at the age of 12 I said I would never do, and that was to get married. But I decided I would get married. I didn't just marry anybody. I married the beautiful and talented actress, Halle Berry. Halle Berry and I stayed married for 15 long, beautiful years up here. And if there's a thing called a perfect wife, Halle Berry was the perfect wife. She didn't say nothing but yes, dear, and okay, dear, whatever you want to do, dear. And going into the 16 year, the warden did something that he had never done for death row inmates. He decided that he would show us a movie. And the movie was called Speed. For the first time in my life, I laid eyes on the beautiful and talented actress, Sandra Bullock. And I watched this lady drive this bus around and around. To be honest with you, I was building my nerves up to give Halle some sad news. And when I built my nerves up, I looked at Halle and I said, I'm going to divorce you and I'm going to marry Sandra Bullock. And by that time, the God was calling me. He said, Anthony, I've been calling you for 15 minutes. I said, I'm sorry, I was gone. I said, what is it? He said, you have a legal visit. I said, but I don't have an attorney. He said, well, somebody is out there pretending to be a lawyer. Get dressed and go see who it is. And as I got dressed, I went out there, and there's this lawyer from Boston. And I asked this lawyer who knew me in Boston that they would send him to Alabama to represent me. He tells me a man by the name of Brian Stevenson. And I asked him who was Brian Stevenson. He told me who Brian Stevenson was and what Brian Stevenson do. Right there in Montgomery, Alabama, we sit and we talked. This lawyer came back every year and told me what he had found out and what he was trying to do. And in the fourth year, that lawyer came back and he said, Anthony, I can get you a life without parole. I looked at that lawyer and I said, life without parole is for guilty people, not innocent people. I said, you asking me to stand up and admit to something that I didn't do? I said, I could never stand up and say I did something when I didn't do it. I looked at that lawyer and I said, if the state of Alabama is hell bent on executing me for a crime they know that I didn't commit, so be it. I said, there's nothing I can do about that. I said, but I could never stand up and say I did something when I didn't. I said, I want to share something with you that my mother told me at the age of 12. I said, my mother told me if I was man enough to bend down and pick up a rock, and if I was man enough to throw that rock, I should be man enough to say that I threw that rock. I said, this is one rock that I didn't throw. Therefore, I could never say I did when I didn't do it. I looked at the lawyer and I said, I need a lawyer that believes in me. I need a lawyer that is willing to go to jail for me if necessary. The fact that you trying to get me a life without parole tells me that you don't believe in me. Therefore, I have no choice but to fire you. The lawyer said, are you serious? And I said, yes. I said, but I want to thank you for what you've done. I want to thank you for what you tried to do. I said, but I just need a lawyer that believes in me. And as he was going out the front, they was taking me back toward the back. Something in my mind said, you got to be the dumbest person in the world. You fired the only lawyer that you had. But just as that thought entered my mind, another thought said, you did the right thing. Always stand up for what you believe in. And as I got back toward the cell, a guard was watching TV. I stopped and I asked him, what was he watching? He told me he was watching this lawyer out of Montgomery talk about the death penalty. I asked that guard, can I stand there and watch for a moment? And he said, yes. Lo and behold, that was Brian Stevenson talking about why we don't need a death penalty in this country. And I listened to Mr. Stevens, and I realized at that moment, this is the lawyer that I need to represent me. I go in the cell and I write Mr. Stevenson a letter. I thank him for sending the lawyer from Boston to represent me, but I told him it just didn't work out. And I said, Mr. Stevenson, I realize that you get a lot of letters from inmates saying that they are innocent, but I am truly innocent. I said, Mr. Stevenson, I would like for you to consider being my lawyer, but before you say yes or no, all I ask is that you read my transcript. And if you find one thing in my transcript that points to my guilt, do not worry about sending me a lawyer. Do not worry about becoming my lawyer. I am perfectly willing to die for a crime that I know that I didn't commit. But more important, God knows I didn't commit. Mr. Stevenson wrote me back about 3 months later saying that he would read my transcript. 5 months later, I get another letter saying that he was coming to see me. The day that he said he was coming, he came to the prison, and the moment I shook this man's hand, I knew that God had sent me his number one lawyer. We sit down and we talked about our childhood, and finally we got off into the case, and I said, Mr. Stevenson, if no two guns is alike, I know that the state of Alabama is telling a lie. I said, Mr. Stevenson, I need you to do me a favor. He asked me, what is the favor? I said, I need you to hire a ballistic expert. Mr. Stevenson looked at me and he said, well, I was going to do that anyway. And I looked at Mr. Stevenson and I said, Mr. Stevenson, I'm not explaining myself right. I said, Mr. Stevenson, I need you to hire a white man. And I need this white man to be from the South. I said, Mr. Stevenson, I need this white man to be the best of the best. But I need this white man to just tell the truth. I said, Mr. Stevenson, I need this white man to believe in the death penalty. But above all of that, I just need him to tell the truth. Mr. Stevenson left that day. About 5 months later, I get word to call Mr. Stevenson. He informed me that he had found 3 other world-renowned experts. He informed me that these 3 experts was the best of the best. But he asked me, Ray, are you sure that these are the experts that you want me to hire? He said that these 3 experts have never testified for the defense. They only testified for the prosecution. He said, in other words, they put men on death row. They have never testified to get one off of death row. Are you sure? And I said, Mr. Stevenson, did you remember to ask them, would they just tell the truth? And he said, each one have assured me they would tell exactly what the evidence say. And I said, Mr. Stevenson, if you have enough money, hire those experts. They came to Alabama separate one at a time, and when the third one finally done his examination, they all got to Mr. Stevenson and they informed him that the state of Alabama had made a mistake. But the state of Alabama didn't make a mistake. The state of Alabama had every intention of executing me for a crime they knew I hadn't committed. The state of Alabama was going to execute me in your name. And that name would be justice. We goes before the Attorney General, a man by the name of Bill Pryor. We asked him to take 1 hour to re-examine the evidence. But Bill Pryor was quoted as saying, as far as he was concerned, the right man was on death row. And although it was only take 1 hour, he said it would be a waste of time. And more important, he said it would be a waste of the taxpayer money to re-examine the bullets. For not doing his job, George W. Bush appointed him to a federal lifetime appointment. We go before two more attorney general, and they too refused to take 1 hour to re-examine the bullets. And I began to wonder why they wouldn't examine the bullets. And the reason they didn't want to examine the bullets was because of the color of my skin. I was not worth 1 hour. But more important, I was not worth the truth. Therefore, the state of Alabama tried and tried to get me an execution date. But the state of Alabama couldn't get an execution date because I still had some appeal left. Mr. Stevenson informed me that the judges in Alabama was not going to do the right thing. He informed me that we need to file my case to the United States Supreme Court. I told Mr. Stevenson to file my case to the United States Supreme Court. I sit on Alabama death row an extra 16 years because the state of Alabama would not do the right thing. And in that 16 years, I got the worst news that I could get. My mother had passed. And I remember telling Mr. Stevenson that I didn't care anything about that case. I told Mr. Stevenson I didn't want to live in a world without my mother, because all of my life, my mother have always been there for me. And I told Mr. Stevenson I didn't care whether the state of Alabama execute me today. And I hung up. That night, I tried to sleep, but I couldn't sleep. It was as though my mother had came in that cell and stayed in my ear all night long. And my mother was telling me that she couldn't believe that I was willing to give up so easily. I could hear my mother telling me that all my life I brought you up to fight when you needed to fight. It wasn't until my mother I could hear my mother telling me that she was disappointed in me. And I didn't want ever to make my mother disappointed in me, because I have never been disappointed in my mother. And that morning, I sent for the telephone and I called Mr. Stevenson. I apologized for hanging up without saying thank you and goodbye. But I told Mr. Stevenson that I had had a moment of weakness. I wanted him to give Alabama all the hell that he could give them. We went before 14 judges in Alabama, and every judge turned me down. We filed my case to the United States Supreme Court. 2 years after filing my case to the United States Supreme Court, the United States Supreme Court did something that it have never did in the history of the courts. All 9 justices ruled that I was entitled to a new trial. They sent my case back to Alabama. We goes before the trial judge. The prosecution stand up and say, Your Honor, it is with great sadness that we inform you that we have lost the gun to this case. The judge said, what you mean you lost? She said, Your Honor, we can't find it. She give them 90 days to find the gun. We goes back to her courtroom in 90 days. The prosecution stand up and say, Your Honor, we found the gun. But once again, it was great sadness to inform you that we have lost the bullets to the gun. The judge give them 90 more days. And while we thought they were looking for the bullets, we found out that the prosecution had called one of his experts that testified 30 years ago to come back and re-examine the bullets. He came back and he is quoted in the Birmingham News as saying that the bullets do not match the way they matched 30 years ago. But those bullets match exactly the way they did 30 years ago. Bullets are like fingerprints. They don't change. On March, we kept marching. We kept seeking the truth. And finally, on April the 3rd, I was released from death row. The state of Alabama had every intention of executing me, as I said earlier, in your name, in the name of justice. Today, I feel compelled to ask you a question. And that question is, where is my justice? Where do I go and get justice? I sit on a 5x7 for 30 long years for a crime that they knew from day one that I had not committed. And here we are 37 years later, and no one in the state of Alabama have had the decency to say Mr. Hinton was sorry. I truly believe with every fiber in my being that being born black and poor, the men of power would never apologize to a man of no power. But I want you to know that in those 30 years, I was able to do something that have never been done on death row. I started my own book club. I made men believe and see that God is real. I was moved next to a Ku Klux Klansman who had done a horrible crime. But I remember that my mother told me, no matter what one does, they still deserve some compassion. I never will forget that I asked this Ku Klux Klansman why he hated me. And his response was, all black people. And I cut him off and I said, I didn't ask you about all black people. I asked you, why do you hate me? Once again, he said, all black people. And I said, do you know the difference between black people and one individual? I am talking about one individual, me. And I heard him say, I don't even know you. And I said, exactly. So why do you hate me? For the next 15 years, every day, all day, I talked to this Klansman who had hung a black young man in Mobile, Alabama. All day and every day, I talked to this man about God. I talked to him about being brainwashed. And as time would progress, I never will forget the day he introduced me to his father, who happened to be the Grand Wizard of the Ku Klux Klan in Alabama. I got up off my table and went over to his table. And he said, Ray, I want you to meet my father. He said, Daddy, this is my friend, Ray. I reached my hand out to shake his father's hand, but his father refused to shake my hand, I took my hand back and went back to my table. And when visiting hour was over, I looked at Henry and I asked Henry what was wrong. He first said nothing, and I said, Henry, what is wrong? He looked at me and he said, my father told me, as long as he come to see me, do not ever invite a nigger to his table. And I said, Henry, that is your father cancer. If your father want to die with the cancer of hate, let him die. But you don't have to die with that cancer of hate. We went back to our cell and we talked that evening about mostly his father. I told Henry that all his life he had been brainwashed to hate for no reason. As God would have it. 2 years later, his mother came to death row. She died right there on the visiting table of a mass heart attack. 3 months later, his father came and he died right there on death row of a massive heart attack. We all rallied around Henry just as we would in any neighborhood. We tried to comfort him. But then the state of Alabama set Henry an execution date. Henry wrote the warden and asked the warden, could I be with him on the day of his execution, due to the fact that he had no family left. The warden granted him his wish. We went on the visiting yard that morning, and I wanted to make Henry laugh all day. I didn't want Henry to think about tonight would be your last night on earth. They gave us change to get snacks out of the vending machine. About 7 o'clock that night, they brought Henry his final last meal. He lifted the tray up, and that was a 6-ounce steak. I looked at my friend Henry and I said, is that all you want for your last meal? And he said, yes. He looked at me and he said, Ray, can I ask you a question? And I already knew what he wanted to ask me, but I said, yes. He said, if it come your turn. He said, what is it that you're going to order? And I said, Henry, what I want, they're going to have to go to the forest and get it. And when they bring it back, I'm going to say that's not what I ordered. I said, Henry, in other words, is there a law that say that I can't be executed until I die? I said, Henry, I'm going to live forever. Because no matter what they bring, it's not going to be what I want. At exactly 11:30, they got my friend Henry. We hugged and we said our goodbye. I looked at Henry and I told him that I truly believe that I would see him again one day. And I told Henry that I hope and I pray that he had found God for himself. Henry hugged me and he said, Ray, for the last 15 years, you have been a true friend. He left. They put him on new clothes and they shaved his head. They dropped the microphone down and they asked him, did he have any final words? And Henry said, all of my life, I was taught to hate. The very people that I was taught to hate for the last 15 years have shown me nothing but love. And tonight, as I leave this world now knowing what love feels like. And they hung my friend Henry. I tell you that story because we live in a world that is full of hate. I tell you that story because I am a believer that if we were to allow ourselves to just talk to each other, to iron out our difference, I truly believe that we could love one another as Henry and I love one another. I don't understand why we have so much hate in this world. But I want to say today, I truly believe that God is not pleased with preachers, with evangelists, with men of God. I believe that you is talking too much about politics and not preaching enough about forgiveness, love, forgiveness, understanding, compassion. I believe that if the men of God would start preaching about love and understanding and compassion, I truly believe that we could all learn to love one another, to respect one another. I say this evening, death row is the only place that I ever been that I never experienced any racism. For Henry is a prime example of when we have an open and honest conversation, we will be surprised of what can come from that conversation. I ask those of you who will watch this, I ask you to ask yourself, what would you do if they came for you? What would you do if you didn't have the money to hire decent defense? What would you do if you were charged with a crime that you know you didn't commit? What would you do if you passed a polygraph test, but they cared more about the color of your skin than the results of that test? What would you do if you was found guilty and sentenced to death? What would you do if you had to spend the rest of your life in a 5x7? What would you do if you've been waiting all your life to die and finally one day you were set free? I ask you, who would you be? Every day, I ask myself, who am I? Because no one can see the scar that is inside. Every day, I have to live with the fact that I spent 30 years in a 5x7 for a crime that I didn't commit. But I leave you. I want you to know that I forgave the men that got together and did this to me because they had the power and the means to do so. I want you to know that forgiveness is not about you. Forgiveness is only about you. You forgive and you move on with your life. I forgave those men not because they asked me for forgiveness. I didn't forgive those men so they could sleep good at night. I forgave those men so I could sleep good at night. I pray that God will continue to bless you, keep you, and I pray that the God that made us all will continue to bless us all. Thank you so much for listening to my story.
Thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you, and 1,000 times over. Thank you, Mr. And I emphasize the term Mr. Thank you, sir, Anthony Ray Hinton. And I emphasize the word Mr. because the title Mr. because this man's genuine joy and peace and love for God has so gripped me in ways I can't even express. When I met him at the introduction from our member, Tanya Miles, who was intricately involved in getting this nearly 3-year program together, I said, I'm going to shake your hand, sir. And I haven't shaken a man's hand, probably 1 or 2 people in 2 years because of the global crisis. And I'm going to refer to you as Mr. because of the deportment portrayed. And I pray that you'll go back and listen to this very telling and compelling sharing over and over again. Bring your young black, bronze, and brown people with you. It's one thing to be guilty of a crime. It's another thing to be innocent of a crime and then to serve 30 years. This may help some of the violence that we are experiencing with our own culture, if people will really understand what inside looks like from the perspective of a man who was innocent and very young when he was arrested, 30 years of his life. As I heard his story, I was reminded from of the Episcopal pastor who gave this particular rendering during World War II, I want to say it was, with regard to the Nazi attempt to take out everyone, excluding themselves. And it's entitled, First They Came. First they came for the socialists, and I did not speak out because I wasn't a socialist. Then they came for the trade unionist, and I didn't speak out because I wasn't a trade unionist. Then they came for the Jews, and I did not speak out because I was not a Jew. Then they came for me, and there was no one left to speak for me. This call is for a reform in the criminal justice system. The reformation is necessary. I want to say a special thank you and special credit out to the attorney, Brian Stevenson of the Equal Justice Initiative, for his relentless pursuit of justice. And then thank God for the good friend that was mentioned in his book, Mr. Lester Bailey, who never gave up on him, who reminded me of the Holy Spirit that God will always send to be a comforter. And so thank you for being a part of this 2022 Black History offering from New Life Interfaith Ministries. God, thank you for all of the contributors. Thank you for our fine arts department that always augments and fosters top shelf information that graces and enhances our community. Thank you, Pastor Jay, for your always working behind the scenes to make it happen. Thank you 1,000 times over, and thank you, audience, for your time. Until the next time, remember, Jesus is Lord. Blessings and peace.